Hi, this set of videos is for Lecture 5. In this lecture, we will talk about bond market and bond valuation. We have 4 videos in this lecture. In the first video, we introduce concepts related to bond and the market structure of bond market. In the second video, we introduce the valuation formula for bond. In the third video, we talk about how interest rate and coupon rate will change the valuation of bond. In the first video, we introduce corporate bond and the credit spread of corporate bond. In Lecture 2 and Lecture 3, we introduce the discounted cash flow analysis. So we use this analytic framework to establish the present value for future cash flows. It is the central problem for this course and also the central problem for finance. Now we want to apply the discounted cash flow analysis to different types of valuation problem. In this lecture, we apply it to the bond valuation problem. Later in this semester, we will apply it to stock valuation problem and investment project valuation problem. Though these are different categories of valuation problem, they are simply variations of discounting cash flow analysis. So thinking about valuation will simplify the subject of finance. In Lecture 4, we introduce the concept of required return. We assume the required return rate to be 10% or 4%, but we don't ask why the required return rate will be 10% or 4%. Well, in order to determine the appropriate required return, we need another framework, so we can consider the uncertainty or risk involved in an investment opportunity. In the second half of this semester, we will introduce this framework. So for this lecture, I just want to provide a simple idea. That is, if we have higher risk contained in an investment, then we think the required return will be higher. Now we want to apply the discounted cash flow analysis to different financial securities. Financial securities are traded in security markets. Investors use the required return to establish the price of future cash flows. Generally, if the cash flow amount is high, then the market price for this financial security will be high. If the investors has high required return rate, then the market price for this security will be low. In the opposite direction, if investors have low required return rate, then the market price for this financial security will be high. So for bond, we have a stream of cash flows with interest payments and face value. We have this regular interest payment before the maturity date, and we have the face value at the maturity date. You can think the bond issuer is the borrower. The borrower has to repay the interest payment regularly before the end of this borrowing contract. And at the end of this borrowing contract, this borrower has to pay the face value for this loan. Now I want to introduce the main concepts related to bond. First, maturity date. That is the end date for these cash flows of bond. At the maturity date, the bond issuer will pay the principal value, or we say it is the face value. Sometimes we also say it is the par value. So that is the amount that the issuer agrees to pay at the end of the contract at the maturity date. The third concept related to bond is the coupon rate. It determines the interest payment before the maturity date. Generally, the coupon rate will be fixed before the maturity date, and the coupon rate will be the same as the market rate for most of the bonds. We have special categories of bonds. For example, callable bonds. For callable bonds, the bond issuer can repurchase the bond before the maturity date at a predetermined price. We also have convertible bonds. For convertible bonds, the bond investor have the right to exchange the bond for other categories of securities. For example, the common stock issued by the same corporation. Typically, the bond investor can exchange the bond before the maturity date. We also have zero coupon bonds. For zero coupon bonds, the bond issuer doesn't pay coupon or interest payment before the maturity date. They only pay the face value at maturity date. Now I want to talk about the market structure of bond markets. If we are a corporation and we want to issue bond, first we go to the primary market. We have two choices to sell the bond. The first choice is to use the auction. In an auction, you sell the bond to the financial institutions with high evaluations of bond. In the second choice, we can sell the bond to some investment banks. Then the investment banks will sell the bond to other financial institutions. After the initial offering of bond, the financial institutions or the general investors can make transaction of bond in the secondary markets of bond. Bond markets have the secondary market in the structure of over-the-counter market. In this over-the-counter market, if you want to sell the bond, first you need to contact the bond broker. The bond broker will find a buyer for you. Then you make this transaction with this buyer. Okay, this is for the first video for Lecture 5. Thanks.